Welcome to the Path and Purpose podcast, where we explore the journey of living and leading from your soul's purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Cameron Martin. As a spiritual coach and leader, I've dedicated my life to helping changemakers, creatives, and conscious leaders align with their soul's calling. In each episode, we dive deep into the stories of those who are paving the way for a more conscious and compassionate world. My purpose is to explore the intersection of spirituality and leadership, offering you practical insights and inspiration to live and lead with authenticity. Join me as we discover how to embrace our soul gifts, overcome barriers, and learn to lead from being. This podcast will inspire you to live in alignment with your soul's purpose and create a lasting impact, one conversation at a time. Hey there, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the podcast. I'm excited to be here with you today. This month, I wanted to take a moment to reflect upon some of the major teachings that I have sort of been sprinkling throughout several of the podcast episodes, and also teachings that I've included in the Soul Purpose Collective over the last few months. We're moving and living through a time of great change on planet Earth, and if you've been listening to the show, and we've been exploring conversations around leadership and what leadership can look like, and what following a more conscious and spiritually connected path can look like, we know that we're moving through periods of major change. And in response to that, I want to share a couple of teachings with you today, namely my understanding of leadership and a whole new word that I'd like to share with you so you can bring into your context. I also want to share a few teachings from the Law of One and make connections to what is happening in the sky astrologically as it relates to this period of time that we are moving through. And so if you've been listening to other episodes, you've heard me talk about how leadership is ultimately an act of creating space for people to be. This is how I understand leadership. This is the way that I think about it, that the ultimate act of a leader is to create space, to hold a container for others to explore their own being, their soul's purpose, their mission, their energy, and allow that to express in whatever way that may be. And there's a word that has come through me since 2024 that I want to share with you today. And when I first heard it, I was like, wow, I think this is something. And so it's one word. The word is Beingspaces. And when I first heard it, I was like, ooh, what is this? And what is a being space? And what do we do with that? And I've actually written already like 75% of a book around what a being space is. But I want to share this idea with you because it's foundational to this idea of leading from being. A being space is an energetic space that is created in which you exist. There are being spaces that happen within your own being. There are being spaces that happen between individuals, and then there are being spaces that happen among groups of people. And so when I talk about a being space, what I'm speaking of is the energetic signature of a particular space that we're in. So if you take a moment to just close your eyes and reflect and ask yourself, what's going on inside of me? What am I feeling in my body? Is there tension? Is there emotion? Am I fearful? Am I excited? Am I confused? Am I dealing with certain patterns of my past? All of that, those energies, those thoughts, those beliefs, those patterns play up and create your internal being space. If you're doing any sort of spiritual work or spiritual practice right now in your life, then you're probably well aware of the being space that you're creating within yourself. But being spaces can extend beyond just self and to others. So if you and I are having a conversation, there is an interaction, there's an energetic exchange that is happening between me and you. There is something that is being created, maybe a sense of peace, a sense of connection, a sense of feeling seen, or maybe confusion, or irritation, or annoyance. You're creating being spaces with your partners, with your friends, with your coworkers, even the person on the elevator that you are choosing to potentially not even look at when you're in there. Every interaction we have with another being creates a being space. There's energetic signature that is happening between us. And so if I'm aware of that, I can bring a bit of consciousness to it. Just the same way, there are being spaces that exist in communities of people, or where two or more are gathered. So whether these are organizations, teams that you're working for, nations, communities that people are living in, there are ways of being, there are energetic norms, there is sort of a signature that belongs to these groups of people. All of these are being spaces. And why am I giving you this idea? Why am I giving you this word to play with? Because if we start to become aware and conscious of our being spaces, we can create more intentionally. Look, we're always creating energetically around us. If you're talking shit about somebody behind the water cooler with another coworker, perhaps you're not creating consciously, or you're not recognizing that you're creating negative energy that is going to impact another person. Perhaps if we are complaining about something political, or if we are dismissing somebody's ideas because we don't agree with them, we're still creating. And so I believe that in our world, we're not being intentional enough collectively around what we are creating energetically. So the idea of a being space is to give you a tool to recognize, oh, I am co-creating with other beings all the time. There is a being space within me, within myself, and my connection to my guides, my source, my higher self. There is a connection every time I'm connecting with another person. There is a being space between me and you listening to this conversation. What is happening in this energetic space? You can feel it, you can think it, you can become aware of that. And then what is happening energetically on my channel that you're watching this, or that you're listening to the podcast, the community. There is a being space that is being created. The reason I'm sharing this idea with you is to give you a tool to sort of become aware of what's actually happening in the being spaces in your life. What are you bringing to your interactions with people? What are you bringing to your relationships with your coworkers, with your boss? What are you energetically taking responsibility for? Because a being space doesn't just happen. You are part of an energetic space in which you belong. And so if we start to take responsibility for that, we can really shift the way humans interact and the way our world looks. Most people are not taking responsibility for the energetics that they're creating. But if we think about and become more mindful of the being spaces in which we inhabit, we may just be able to shift the world in this way. Last month in the Soul Purpose Collective, we started to play with the idea of being spaces and how we're showing up in these spaces in our lives. I invite you to do the same. And if you want to chat me on the show, you can send a direct message to me, or you can respond in a comment down in the video if you're watching on YouTube. Let me know. What are you noticing in your being spaces? Because when we become more aware of our being spaces, we can actually lead from a place of being much more intentionally. Hey there. If you're enjoying what we're diving into here on the podcast and want to go deeper, I want to invite you to check out the Soul Purpose Collective. The Soul Purpose Collective is my online community where like-minded changemakers, creatives, and leaders come together to explore what it takes to align and lead from their soul's purpose. Head over to yourpathandpurpose.com/SPC for more details. We'd love to have you join us. Now, this month in the Soul Purpose Collective, I'm very excited to share the teachings of the Law of One. Now, the teachings from the Law of One come from this text, The Raw Contact. And I came across this text in 2020 and from the teachings of Aaron Abke, and they've been central in my understanding of leadership, my understanding of the universe, my understanding of universal law. And so I wanted to share some basic teachings with you here, because this month in the collective, we have been looking at the lessons here specifically so we can understand our own soul's evolution, but also how we can change the world around us through our leadership using the principles of the Law of One. So the Law of One, very simply put, teaches that all beings are interconnected, and it emphasizes that every action that we have and every thought that we have affects the collective. In many ways, the idea of a being space that I just shared with you is similar to the ideas presented in the Law of One. Now, the Law of One is material that was channeled from beings called Ra, and Ra is a collective consciousness that, as they say, exist in the sixth density on planet Venus. So they're in a different dimension than ourselves. So if you were to go to Venus, you wouldn't necessarily see them unless you were existing in the sixth dimension. But this material was originally channeled by a group known as L&L Research in the early 1980s. And Ra came through the channel, Carla Ruckert, to share a message to sort of help humanity understand our connection to the universe and our connections to how we create and our relationship to what we truly are in the universe. Now, if this sounds a little bit weird for you, or like, what is he talking about, a channeled message from a galactic group, an extraterrestrial group? Yes, that's exactly what I'm telling you. But I invite you, if that sounds a little weird, to just stay open to the message itself. Don't worry about where exactly it came from. But the core message of the Law of One essentially teaches that we are all connected, we are all one, that we all come from the one infinite creator, and we all manifest our lives separately from the one infinite creator. But ultimately, every individual is a reflection of the divine. And so, as we understand our connection to self, we actually understand our connection to source, to the one infinite creator. Now, Ra teaches in the Law of One many different principles that I think are extremely powerful, one of which are the energy centers. So they teach about the energy centers that our physical bodies have as humans. If you are a yogi or you've practiced sort of energy work, you may know these centers as chakras. Ra doesn't speak to them as chakras, they speak to them as energy centers. But there's quite a bit in the text about the energy centers, about how we can utilize our energy, about how we can understand our expressions of, let's say, the heart chakra, for example, or our throat chakra, for example, or what the third eye is really all about, and how we can harness these energies. They also teach about free will and the importance of free will on the soul's path to evolution. Each of us has the right to make free will choices. In fact, I've shared this before, that we are souls that choose to come into bodies in this lifetime, in this incarnation, and we are free willed beings first and foremost. In fact, our first act of free will was the choice to come here and to have an incarnation experience. Our astrology charts show us what that energetic experience was. So free will is a fundamental principle that allows a soul to evolve and to grow and to change. Now, when we abridge free will, we create karma, or we create some sort of energetic attachments and connections to others. So how do you abridge free will? When we manipulate, when we control, when we try to deceive others, when we don't provide the right information for people in order for them to make choices, if we try to lie to them, all of that would be an example of how we abridge free will. And when we abridge free will, we create karma, we create energetic bonds to beings that eventually have to be balanced out in other lifetimes. Now, the lessons of free will are extremely important, not only in your soul's evolution, but as leaders as well. Because how do we honor free will inside of our teams, inside of our workplaces? Most of our leadership paradigms that exist on planet Earth actually don't consider free will at all. They see people as pawns in a game. I want you to do this, I manipulate you to do that. I'll create this message in marketing that's actually lying and manipulating. I'll push you kind of in this sneaky sales way so that you can buy something that maybe you don't really want, right? There's a lot of this practice that is happening. But obviously, if you're listening to the show, then you know that I teach about leading from being, which foundationally means we need to honor the free will of other beings, of all of us. And so Ra has a lot to say about free will. They also share a ton of information about how the soul can evolve through the densities of consciousness, from the first density experience of understanding awareness itself, when we incarnate as elements like air, fire, water. We might be rocks for millions of years, just becoming aware, to the second density experience of self-awareness. And these are the experiences of plants and animals predominantly, where there is an awareness of self and an interconnection perhaps that is beginning to happen or form among other plants or animals of our likeness. In the third density experience, we experience a consciousness of separation. And this is where we have an ego mind and an ability to reflect upon self. In the third density experiences where humans are actually existing and have existed, this place of separation where I am me, you are you, we are separate selves. But Ra speaks about how evolution continues on the path. The fourth density, where we start to connect with the heart and we start to recognize unity. We start to understand that we are all one. And eventually, in fourth density experiences, we don't even need language anymore because they're telepathic. Ra speaks about how we are living through a period that they call the harvest, where humanity is choosing a path of evolution. And each of us as souls are choosing a path of evolution, whether we want to choose a path towards service to self or a path towards service to others. And this brings perhaps the biggest teaching of the Law of One, which is the concepts of polarity. If you're interested, they also share about how the soul evolves into later densities of consciousness. The fifth density, where we learn about wisdom. The sixth, where we integrate wisdom and love. And the seventh, which they don't really know about because they don't exist in that level of consciousness yet, until we exist in a completely different octave and the soul evolves. But back to the point about the harvest. There are many ways of saying this. Ra speaks about this period of time as the harvest. The Mayan calendars have spoken about the end of time in 2012. We've seen in many different spiritual teachings the importance of the years around 2012. And really, what this is all about is a culmination of a cycle on planet Earth. Earth herself, as a sentient being, is shifting, is changing, is becoming an evolved consciousness herself. And we, as humans on the planet, are being given the opportunity to do the same. But our soul's path, we have two choices towards evolution. The first path is a polarity of service to self. The second path is a polarity of service to others. So when we are focused upon service to self, this is a path that emphasizes individualism, personal gain, and self-advancement, where beings are usurping power, manipulating others, controlling others, lying to others, taking energy from others. Ra talks about this as the negative polarity. Not that it is necessarily a bad polarity. It's negative in the sense that it draws energy towards it. It takes from other beings. And what we're seeing on planet Earth is quite a bit of this. And a lot of our leadership paradigm on planet Earth has been oriented service to self for a very long time, where I, the leader, control and take and manipulate and lie to get what I want out of something. To hell with people. This is a truly service to self path. And you can think of beings who are on service to self paths like Genghis Khan, like Adolf Hitler, and Ra speaks about this. This is one way in which a soul can evolve for a bit of time, to continue to focus upon self and the ideas of separation and division and control and manipulation. We can consider this, and a lot of times in the spiritual communities, you may hear this as a dark path. Ra calls it the negative polarity. The other option is to choose a path of soul evolution of service to others. And if you're listening to this podcast, then you are more than likely on this path of service to others. The service to others path focuses on compassion, unity, oneness, helping others, the well-being of all. This would be being motivated by love and empathy and compassion, wanting to uplift others, wanting to help others, wanting to grow personally by supporting the growth of others. This can foster deep connections with other beings and a sense of oneness and community. This service to others path, beings like Mahatma Gandhi and Jesus and yourself perhaps are on these paths. But here's what's really interesting. And Rob, by the way, speaks about this as the positive polarity, which isn't to say good polarity, good versus bad, but more that the energy emanates from and out. So the negative polarity draws toward it for its own power, and the positive polarity does the opposite, draws from it and serves outward. Humanity is moving through a period of evolution. And externally, it looks really, really chaotic, and it looks confusing, and it's loud. There's a lot of duality and polarity that is playing out in the world. This is perfect, and it's meant for our evolution, for us to choose which path do we want to go on. Now, Ross speaks about, from a soul's perspective of evolution, having to polarize 51% or more towards the positive polarity in order to evolve as a soul in the positive direction, service to others direction. And actually, the path of service to self is even more challenging because you have to be 95% or more polarized towards self-serving interests, taking, manipulating, controlling, in order to evolve in that way. But what is happening on planet Earth during this period that Ra describes as the harvest is that we're being given the environment through which we can choose which way do we want to go. And we have to choose to polarize in one direction or the other, because planet Earth herself is shifting into the fourth density. In fact, already exists in the fourth density. We're just catching up to it. And so everything that's happening on the planet is causing us opportunities for awakening and to connect with our hearts so that we can move toward, or not, so that we can move towards one path or the other. Rod describes that after a while, the third density experience of separation that humans are used to on planet Earth will come to an end. And when you pass from this life and your soul that needs to experience third density experiences again, you will do it on another planet because Earth's frequencies won't be able to hold that anymore. But we're moving towards experience of the fourth density, which are experience of unity consciousness, of oneness, of love, of community, of connection. Ra actually speaks quite a bit about what the fourth density experience looks like. It is still physical. We will still have a body, but we will feel lighter. We will not carry so much density. We will not carry so much density in the mind. The ego, as a structure of the mind, will actually dissolve and will understand and know viscerally oneness, the sense of oneness to other beings. After a while, beings in the fourth density don't need language anymore because they're telepathic. They're just able to communicate with one another. These are things that humanity as a collective can be evolving toward if we so choose. I share all of this with you because it's what we're exploring this month in the Soul Purpose Collective. Our polarity, what's going on within ourselves, what is polarizing within us, the ways in which maybe perhaps we polarize service to others and want to help others and connect to the path of positive polarity, and the ways in which we might be self-serving and negatively polarizing, so that we can come to find a middle path. And Ross speaks about the power of spiritual balancing, and for us to find this middle path and to connect with what our soul ultimately wants us to pursue. I think this is an extremely powerful lesson in leadership because we're moving away from a paradigm of self-service, and we can, if we choose, consider the paradigm of service to others, to helping others, to supporting others as leadership as opposed to something else. My whole concept of being-centered leadership, and the reason I brought up the idea of a being space, is to give a tangible tool that can be used in practice for leaders to do something with, to recognize that they can focus their attention on service to others. They can focus their attention on a positive polarity if they so choose. I think it's really quite interesting for us to reflect upon our own soul's journey and what has happened for us even since 2020, if you want to go back, and think about the ways in which you've grown, the things that you have overcome, the patterns of behavior, and to recognize your own soul's kind of journey and evolution toward perhaps what Ra was speaking of here in this moment of harvest. We're ultimately living through a period on planet Earth that souls have been begging and essentially knocking down the doors to come in to experience. The work that I've done with Dolores Cannon's work in QHHT, she also spoke about this, that souls want to be here right now because there is so much of an opportunity to polarize to choose to become a very evolved soul towards service to others, or to evolve on the negative path, service to self. Either way is perfectly fine, but the world that we're living in is giving us so much catalyst, so many opportunities to choose. What do I resonate with? Do I resonate with this negativity and this fear and this control and this manipulation? Or do I resonate with light and love and connectedness and community? All of this is happening for our soul's evolution. I'm recording this in October of 2024. This is before the presidential election in the United States, when there is an increasing amount of polarity that is playing out in our political structures, of course, but not just here, all over the world, in political structures and social structures, in our workplaces, in economics, this feeling of right, wrong, good, bad, we're better, you're worse. This is an old paradigm of separation consciousness that is essentially third density consciousness that has existed on planet Earth and in our leadership for a very long time. And we're being given an opportunity now through the exaggeration of polarity, the exaggeration of differences, the exaggeration of all of these forces up against one another, to choose something else, to choose a middle path, to choose a path of neutrality, that it's not Republican versus Democrat. I am me in a sovereign space. I get to choose what I want for my life. Not some other leader externally out there, but me. I get to choose. It's not about my race, my color, my ethnicity, all of the things that we use to separate ourselves, but it's about me knowing myself as a being, me knowing myself as consciousness itself, expressing through the human experience. That's what we're being afforded right now in our lives and in the world. And it's a super exciting time to be alive because of it. Hey there. If you're intrigued by the deep exploration of your soul's journey, then you might be interested in QHHT, Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. Think of it as an experience of a past life regression meets a conversation with your higher self meets an opportunity for physical healing. During a QHHT session, you'll experience a transformative experience and access insights about your life's purpose, past lives, and discover the root of chronic physical issues you may be experiencing. Visit yourpathinpurpose.com/QHHT to learn more and schedule your session with me today. To connect to what's happening astrologically, Ra in the text speaks about the harvest, this moment of major change and major shift and major transition. Astrologically, we are moving through a major shift and a major transition. Specifically, the transition in the sky is Pluto moving direct and eventually into the sign of Aquarius. Now, why is this significant? Pluto was moving around in the sky at the last degrees, the late degrees of Capricorn since 2020. And during that time, Capricorn energy is all about structure, it's all about power, it's all about authority. During that time, and by the way, Pluto is in the sign of Capricorn since 2008, when we started to see an economic crisis and everything that played out from 2008 to 2020, and even now, it's all one thread. A lot of changes around structures, power, authority, governments, the abuse of power, and the structures of the lives that we are living in. And since 2020, we've seen a lot of this break down, especially as Pluto, the planet of transformation and change and power, has moved through the very late degrees of the sign. Pluto went retrograde in 2024 after dipping into Aquarius for a few months, where we actually saw the advent of AI in a very big way publicly, and many other things. But as Pluto went back, it was essentially the final review. And now we're at the place of a final shakeup. Pluto is now moving forward in the sign of Capricorn for the final shakeup of the structures, the powers, and the systems that we've created in our world. Pluto will be moving into the sign of Aquarius on November 9th, 2024, and will remain in that sign until March 8th, 2043. So this is a almost 20-year transit. It is extremely important because we're moving away from the old structures of power and authority that are top down, that are about governments controlling people, that are about corporations controlling people, that are about economies controlling people, religions controlling people, into an energy of Aquarius, which is an energy of oneness. It's an energy of unity. Aquarius energy is about freedom. It's about decentralization of power. It's about sovereignty. It's about vibration and healing. It's about shifting our consciousness and awakening to the oneness that we are. During this period, depending, of course, upon the choices that humanity makes, rather whether that be choices towards service to others and the positive polarity that Ra speaks about, or service to self, the negative polarity, we will see this play out. This is quite literally, by the way, the birthing of the age of Aquarius that people in spiritual communities have been talking about since the 60s. Aquarian energy is very much about science and technology, about the internet, about AI, about our connection to the cosmos, consciousness itself, our connections to extraterrestrial beings and extraterrestrial life. So much is going to change in our world in pretty fast succession, actually. Now that Pluto is moving into this sign of Aquarius, we're going to see major shifts to the way that humanity even looks. We are absolutely living right now through a change in epoch, a complete shift, much like where we were living and shifting into the industrial age, where the belief systems and the ways of being and the structures that we've created on this planet have now led us as far as we can go, but now we need to choose something else. This is a moment of our evolution. And it is quite an exciting time to be on planet Earth. But I should note that with Pluto's energy, it's very transformative, it's very powerful, and it can be destructive. So it won't necessarily be easy. I share all of this with you today as a message of empowerment for you to recognize that you chose to be here in this moment, and whatever comes next is going to be perfect for your soul's evolution. But it's not about sitting back and hoping that the world will get better or hoping that the structures of our government will get better. It's actually about engaging with our process by becoming aware of our own being spaces and taking responsibility for our own energy, recognizing that we are souls on an evolutionary path and we get to choose. Do I want the experience of the positive polarity, service to others, unity consciousness, connection, or do I want to continue the energy of separation and division and famine and disease and all of the experiences that we would consider potentially negative on planet Earth? We get to choose. And not only are we doing that at a soul level as an individual, but we're also doing it in the place of leadership. We get to choose how we show up and how we interact and what we want to foster in our teams, in our workplaces, in the things that we create. And right now, energetically, there is so much shifting in the sky cosmically. And I invite you to really feel into what that means for you as a possibility. You, of course, could listen to my message and think, oh my goodness, this is fearful, but it's not. This is a moment of great opportunity. And I invite you to really feel into that for yourself. And of course, if you found any of the topics that I spoke about in this podcast interesting, then I invite you to join us in the Soul Purpose Collective, where each month I explore a specific theme and foundational spiritual teachings so that you can align with your soul's purpose and lead from that place. And so I hope that you found this an interesting conversation today. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to put a comment below. I'd love to hear about it. And if you're listening to the podcast, you can message the show directly as well. I'd love to hear what you have to say. But over the next month, before you hear my next solo episode, there's going to be a lot of shifting and a lot of changing, actually over the next several months for humanity. As we move into the year 2025, there's a lot that's going to shift and change. And there's a lot that could potentially distract us. But I invite you to know this. You always have control over your evolution, over where you're putting your energy and your time. You are creating your being spaces all the time. You are the soul that's choosing an evolutionary path. Things aren't happening to you, they're happening for you to help you to evolve, to grow, to shift, and to change. And for many of us, this is our time to shine. You're here to share your gifts. You're here to share your knowledge. You're here to share your wisdom, because I promise you, humanity needs it and will continue to need it moving forward. So I hope that you're enjoying season 2 of the podcast, and I thank you for joining me this month. I also thank you for joining me for this episode, and I look forward to sharing more with you soon. A heartfelt thanks to you for tuning into this episode. I'm Dr. Cameron Martin, and it's been an honor to support you on your path to self-discovery. As you reflect on today's conversation, remember that the journey toward living and leading from your soul's purpose is ongoing. You're never alone in it. Until next time.